Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Joy Powers. Tomorrow, April 7th, is Election Day in Wisconsin. So today, we're getting you ready with a look at the races, and we'll tell you what's at stake in the Supreme Court race.
If you are a liberal and you want to win this seat, you could put you on the path to guaranteeing that you would have the majority of the court through the next round of redistricting, which would be huge. If you're a conservative, you would want to win this seat to keep the hole from getting deeper.
Plus, we'll break down what the Milwaukee County Board does.
Much of the most important action that the county board does is reviewing and voting on and amending the budget that's proposed by the county executive.
All of that is coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Joy Powers, and thank you so much for joining us. On today's show, we're helping you get ready for Election Day. That's tomorrow, April 7th. We'll start with the latest on the races and what to look out for in Capital Notes.
This is Capital Notes from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Maayan Silver in conversation with J.R. Ross, editor of WizPolitics.com. Hi, J.R. Happy spring election week.
Hey, thanks. Same to you.
Thank you. We've got, as we mentioned, the spring election tomorrow. In the state Supreme Court race, there's liberal-backed appellate judge Chris Taylor. She's running against conservative-backed appellate judge Maria Lazar. The court is currently made up of 4 liberals and 3 conservatives, and the open seat is to replace a conservative candidate. So as a result, the liberal-leaning justices will be in the majority on the court, regardless of who wins in the immediate future. There have been a lot fewer ads in this race and a lot less money spent than in previous years. What would you say to someone, JR, who says that this race is politically inconsequential?
Well, if you are a liberal and you want to win this seat, you could put you on the path to guaranteeing that you would have the majority of the court through the next round of redistricting, which would be huge. If you're a conservative, you would want to win this seat to keep the hole from getting deeper, so you're not taking a decade to climb out of that hole. Now, I mean, this race by itself is not going to determine those things, but if you add this year's race plus next year's race, I mean, there's a window for liberals to lock up the majority through the 2031 redistricting process, which means the state Supreme Court would be a backstop for any map if Republicans had the governor's office and both houses of the legislature after the 2030 elections. You'd have a friendly court you could go to challenge that map. If you're a conservative, do some math. It's 4-3 right now for liberals. If you lose this one, it goes 5-2. If you lose in 2027, it goes to 6-1. Well, now you've got to win in 2018. Rebecca Dallett's on to get it back to 5-2. You have to hold Brian Hagedorn in 2029 to keep it 5-2. Beat Jill Karofsky in 2030. Get back to, you're talking like you wouldn't have a chance to flip the majority until 2033 when Janet Protasiewicz is up, and you'd have to run, 4 elections in a row. That's not great odds for you. So yeah, there's a lot at stake, even though it's not for control of the court. There's a lot, for the future of the court at stake on Tuesday.
Can you lay out for people who may not know just the redistricting in 2030, how the court could be involved in that?
So we got a couple of things. One, after every census, which will happen in 2030, states then draw new maps. If you have unified control of the Capitol by one party, hey, it's easier to draw a map. We saw that in 2011 with Republicans. It was still challenged in court, but then you go to one of the federal courts, and you had a conservative majority in the state of the Supreme Court. Well, 2020 rolls around, that census, 2021, they go to try and draw maps. They can't agree on it. You got a Democratic governor and Tony Evers. You got Republicans in the legislature who controlled both houses. It ends up in the court. First, it has a conservative majority, which ends up picking a Republican-drawn map for the legislature. Then also picks the governor's map, though with a least change approach to the Republican one drawn a decade before. So it's not really his favorite map, it's the one that he drew within those parameters that set those boundaries. Then in 2023, liberals flip it, new challenge of legislative lines, get new maps that lead to Democrats picking up, more than a dozen seats or whatever it was in 2024. So it's hugely consequential, the role the courts play in these map processes. Now, you also the federal courts, and it's a long way away till 2031 when they start this process. But depending what court you end up in, you could have a more favorable court in the state of Wisconsin than the federal court if you have control of that state Supreme Court.
As you've mentioned, this election could significantly help determine the future of the court. Last year, we had a Wisconsin Supreme Court race. The election was going to determine whether liberals could keep majority on the court, and it was going to determine the outcome of a big abortion rights case. It was 2 months into Republican President Donald Trump's second term. There had been a whirlwind of action, including Doge's mass layoffs of federal workers. Elon Musk and other out-of-state donors were massively spending in that race. Some said that it was a referendum on a sitting U.S. president and the popularity of the world's richest man. Is there a way to see this year's Wisconsin Supreme Court race as a referendum on Trump or a referendum on anything else?
It hasn't been nationalized the way it was a year ago. So don't forget, beyond just the influence of Trump and Elon Musk, there was a perception nationally among Republicans that this court race for 2025 could end up determining whether Wisconsin's congressional map was redrawn. Now, Susan Crawford, who won that race, downplayed that chatter before and after her election. We have not seen the court overturn a map since Crawford got on the court, right? But Republicans were super interested because, hey, Wisconsin is a swing state, and if you lose a seat or two, that could be the control majority of the House of Representatives. So that would make it much different. Two, it was for control. You see all this money flowing in. It's just not the same pizzazz. This time around, you're not seeing Trump endorse Maria Lazar. You're not seeing Elon Musk here. You're still seeing talk about abortion being an issue. It came up during the debate on Thursday night. We've seen some ads about that in the race, but there just isn't the same intensity because there aren't the same number of resources that we saw in 25 or in 23 for that matter.
You mentioned the debate. It was last Thursday. It was the first and only debate between the candidates. Where did they come down on the issue of abortion? And is that issue as salient now that the court has ruled that abortion is lawful in Wisconsin up to 20 weeks post-fertilization?
So it's a good question how the impact. I mean, it's still not a great issue for conservatives and spring electorates from what we've seen. Maria Lazar is trying to walk this line where she said that, the Dobbs decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, it sent the issue back to the states, that states could decide what's best for them, which she said was good. Chris Taylor knocked her on that, saying it's not good for victims of rape and incest in states that have outlawed abortion. But Lazar is also, pointing to that 20-week ban that remains as she calls it a compromise, that she would uphold that law if she was elected. She's trying to find that sweet spot of, not alienating people in the middle on that issue. Now, the challenge for her is you also need people on the right to be motivated for you because you are the conservative, quote-unquote, candidate. And I'm not sure that approach from my conversation so far is really motivating conservatives to turn out for her because she says a lot, I'm not a conservative, I'm an independent, which is in some ways might be admirable to take that kind of approach to a Supreme Court race, but people want to know where your values are. We saw that Marquette poll earlier this year. They do want to know where you stand on things, and Lazar's avoided that. Taylor, meanwhile, Lazar tried to go after her about a bill that she co-sponsored in the legislature that would have, to Lazar, allowed abortion up to the moment of birth. Taylor said no, that would codified Roe v. Wade. You don't understand the bill. So went back and forth about that, but it's still a pertinent issue. It doesn't have the same, it seems, motivation in this race as maybe the 25 and 23, the same emphasis, but it's still out there and still a challenge for conservatives to navigate the electorate in the spring, which has kind of started to tilt more Democratic.
This is Capital Notes. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross of WizPolitics.com. So both candidates in that debate refused to say whether a 3-judge panel was correct in dismissing a challenge to Wisconsin's congressional map as a partisan gerrymander. What did they actually say?
So they, Taylor had this line where she said that, she believes voters should be able to pick who represents them, not the other way around. She went after Lazar for, defending Republican drawn maps in 2011. Lazar said that she did her job back in 2011 as an attorney at the Department of Justice to represent the state, and that the maps that Taylor said were gerrymandered were found to be constitutional, that there was like one change made by a federal court. If you really want to see a gerrymander, go to Illinois, look at their congressional maps. So, a little back and forth, but I don't know that really made a lot of hay with voters in general.
We've got abortion, congressional redistricting, Act 10, lawsuit, all that could be coming before the court. What do you think are going to be the issues most mobilizing voters this week?
Good question, because, one of my questions is, who's mobilizing the voters? And the reason I say that is, looking at the spending, there's definitely an advantage for Chris Taylor. And it's a big one, about $8 million on her side to like $915,000 was our side. That was as of a week out from the election. The numbers have grown since then with more stuff rolling in. But side advantage for Taylor. But what I really noticed is there wasn't a single group as of late last week that had done any independent expenditure reports showing that they were trying to contact voters to turn out for Lazar. Like, there's nobody doing mail, doing phone banks, knocking on doors. Usually you see groups out there doing that stuff to help their side. And it's happening for liberals. Like, I saw these reports showing people out there doing doors and mail for Chris Taylor. There's not so much effort for Maria Lazar. And so that raises the question, what's going to motivate people to come out to vote? Like, is Lazar by herself going to be able to do that? I mean, she's underfunded compared to Chris Taylor. The state Republican Party is doing some things. We're seeing county parties do some things. There's a group called Turning Point Action that posts on social media is chasing ballots the spring election, but they're not filing reports with the state. So it's just not clear what's the effort like on the conservative side, other than it is clear the conservative coalition is not coming to play in this race the way it has in the past. I mean, I'm not seeing the big Republican groups out there engaging in this race. And the question is why? Is it because they don't think Lazar can win because of some deficiency of their candidacy? Or is it they've looked at the last few races and gone, we are in trouble in Wisconsin right now, the spring electorate. We need to regroup, figure out how to get a path forward than spending money on the spring race. We're going to spend on the fall, the governor's race, when we focus on that.
On that note of turnout in 2025 was about 50% in that state Supreme Court election. Of course, that was an anomaly, but in 2018, voter turnout was about 22%. What can you tell us about the previous normal in the state Supreme Court race turnout? And do you think we'll have a new normal with this election, or it's going to go back to, I know you don't have as you always say, you don't have a crystal ball.
Well, 2018, just shy of 1 million people. 2019, 1.2 million people. 2020, you had a presidential primaries going on, so that's kind of like not a great comparison. 23, we had like just shy of 2 million people, something like that, turn out. 25, 2.3, that's huge. So people I talk to think you're more toward that 2018, 2019 model for turnout. One of the things is, it seems like there are a lot of people who are undecided in this race. The question is, why are they undecided? Are they truly like split between Taylor and Lazar? They're well educated about the candidates and their positions, but just can't make up their minds? Or are they conservative voters who are like, well, I know I'm not for Chris Taylor, but I don't know Marie Lazar. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. Does that voter turn out, right? Like, that's the challenge for Lazar, is to get that undecided Republican voter to turn out on Tuesday. You need those folks to win. If you don't get them turned out, you're probably not going to have a path to victory. Whereas with Taylor, the groups are targeting Democratic voters to get them to turn out for her. And so they seem to have the message that she's their candidate. Don't forget, though, all this spending is not overwhelming. It's not like $20 million has been spent by Chris Ronalds. It's like, $9 million and change, which is still a lot of money, don't get me wrong. But it's not an overwhelming amount. So I'm curious, like, what's going to drive those voters to the polls where they feel that engaged, excited about this race, without the same stakes as we saw in 2025 and 2023.
And do you think with a lot of people, it's not necessarily that they're undecided, it's that they're just not following this race?
Yep. If you're not following, you're probably going to turn out. Like, that's a reality. So when you look at the Marquette poll from a few weeks ago, it showed all those undecideds. I'm not sure that really they're truly likely voters in the spring as much as they're people who are, they're voters, but they don't turn out in spring elections. So I don't know if it's a great guide of what's going or great look at what's going on. But yeah, if you're not decided by now, what's going to change your mind between now and Tuesday? Like, that's a huge question.
Is there something that you're going to be following on election night?
Yeah. Look at Waukesha County. That's Reno Czar's home county. They usually have a good number of votes in by like 9:30ish. Try and see if, is she above 62%? That's kind of like been my mark for conservative/Republican candidates to win statewide, to be around there. The exception has been Donald Trump. He got less than 60% in 2024 and still won statewide because of a surge outstate. So if you're using the old rules of thumb, you need to be above that mark in Waukesha County. That'll be a good gauge early in the evening about how Lazar is doing.
Well, thanks for, as always, filling us in on the political news, JR, and thanks for joining me on Capitol Notes.
Anytime.
Tomorrow's election comes after the elections in 2023 and 2025 altered the ideological makeup of the state Supreme Court. Liberal-leaning justices now hold the majority. The ideological makeup will not be influenced by this election, but that doesn't mean the race won't have a long-term impact. WUWM's Maayan Silver is joined by Barry Burden, politics professor at UW-Madison, to find out what's at stake in this election.
Well, each seat on the court is important because it's a 10-year term. So even if the balance of the court doesn't shift from one ideological side to another this year, the person who's elected could serve potentially for another 10 years, and the politics of the state might be very different later in that term, and the balance of the court might be very different. So it does contribute to the makeup of the court now, but also future compositions of the court when the other justices may be different people.
And both Taylor and Lazar are appellate court judges currently, yet the court's role is to decide significant or new legal questions rather than to take appeals on, more routine civil or criminal cases. What do we know about the candidates and their abilities to step up to this role?
Well, they both look like credible candidates. They, have judicial experience and law degrees and have worked in government for a while in different roles, one in the Attorney General's office, one in the state legislature. That makes them, I think, more comparable to one another than we have seen in some other years, where sometimes there's a candidate who has a lot of experience on the bench and another who has come from some other place. So that's sort of, I think, in the minds of voters, probably a neutralizing effect. There's not really a difference between them in that, on that side of things, and probably puts more attention on their personal orientations towards politics, the kinds of things they care about, the way they think about the law, rather than just experience.
Back in 2010, talking about the issues and the cases that will be coming before this court or are likely to come before the court, back in 2010, then Governor Scott Walker orchestrated a signature labor law called Act 10. It significantly curtailed the ability of public employees to form unions and collectively bargain. An appeal on that issue is expected to come before the Wisconsin Supreme Court. What's at stake here?
Well, this has been such a central issue to Wisconsin politics for 15 years now, the rights of public sector workers to organize and collectively bargain for wages and other benefits. It's been a battle, and I think it's really tainted party politics in the state legislature and transformed the way politics works in Wisconsin. It's amazing that this is still being dealt with in the courts, but there is a significant case that the Supreme Court is likely to resolve fairly soon that might restore some rights to workers and undo some important parts of that act. This may not be the last word, which is another reason for voters to care about this election. But I think it's a sign of just the central importance of our state Supreme Court in wading into some of the biggest, most contentious issues that the two other branches of government aren't able to resolve on their own.
And are you able to share anything you know about the candidates' views on Act 10?
Well, I think it's pretty clear they differ on their views about the role of public sector unions. Lazar worked in an administration close to Scott Walker, and I think would be supportive of that kind of legislation. Neither of the candidates will state their views openly on a matter that could come before the court, but that seems likely what her orientation would be. Chris Taylor has been backed by some labor unions in this race and would probably be supportive of, personally, of seeing some parts of the act be taken down. But I think both of them would pledge to be open-minded and to hear the evidence if a case like that came before them. So neither is going to prejudge the case, and we shouldn't, expect for certain how they will come down. The justices will surprise us at times.
Some of the big cases before the Wisconsin Supreme Court in recent years have involved election law. A narrowly divided court rejected President Donald Trump's lawsuit in 2020 to disqualify more than 200,000 ballots from Dane and Milwaukee counties. There's been litigation on absentee ballot drop boxes. Is there anything, do you expect anything to be waiting in the wings for the court on this topic?
Well, there are two cases waiting in the wings at the moment that deal with redistricting. There are two cases asking for the 8 congressional districts to be redrawn for different legal reasons under the state constitution. Those are likely to get back to the state Supreme Court and be decided sometime soon, probably not soon enough for this year's midterm elections to be affected. But that's just, I think, one example of things that may be coming their way. It would not be surprising to see lawsuits again around absentee ballots, around voter registration, around non-citizens voting and the voter registration rolls and requirements to become registered, given the salience of that issue nationally and Republicans concerned about it. So it seems unlikely that the court's going to be able to dodge election questions. Those just keep coming their way, and we should expect them to.
This is Lake Effect. You're tuned in to WUWM Radio. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with Barry Burden, Director of the Elections Research Center and Politics Professor at UW-Madison. And on redistricting in particular, just to remind people, since 2010, state legislative maps drawn by Republicans built pretty large GOP majorities in our state legislature. In 2023, the Liberal-controlled Wisconsin Supreme Court overturned those maps and ordered that new district boundary maps could be drawn for the state legislature. You mentioned that congressional redistricting that question might not be resolved before the midterms, but what do you say are the chances of Democrats taking control of the state Senate or Assembly under these new maps in 2026?
Well, the maps are certainly more competitive since they've been redrawn. The Assembly maps were used in the last election in 2024, and Democrats picked up about 10 seats. So it's now about a 10-seat margin between the two, and within striking distance for Democrats to get a majority there. I wouldn't say it's likely that Democrats flip the Assembly because there are a lot of Republican incumbents who are likely to be reelected. But it's a possibility in a way that it has not been for the Democrats in a decade and a half. The state Senate is probably within closer grasp. Those new districts were used in 2024, but only for half of the seats that were up that year. Those seats are staggered, and now the other half are going to be up in 2026. And some of those Republican incumbents are facing voters they've never faced before because they're using new districts for the first time. There are at least 3 of those districts that Kamala Harris won in 2024 that are held by Republicans. So I think Democrats have a better shot at winning the Senate. But I think really any possibility could happen in a state like ours. It may be that one party pulls off victories in both chambers or they end up split. None of those would be surprising outcomes.
So that's, potential impacts of redistricting and what the state Supreme Court rules or does not rule on those topics. In 2025 also, and definitely in 2023 as well, abortion was a huge topic that was going to be coming before the state Supreme Court. In 2025, it ruled that an 1849 law doesn't ban abortion in the state. It's now available up to 20 weeks. Before that decision, experts deemed the 2023 and 2025 races for the court as some of the most important races on the issue of abortion in the country. What does it mean for the 2026 and future elections now that that issue has been decided?
Yeah, that was really a source of energy in those races because the Dobbs decision from the U.S. Supreme Court had just been handed down, and it really did change the experience on the ground in Wisconsin because abortion had been available at several clinics in the state and was immediately stopped the week that the Dobbs decision was handed down. So I think it had a bite or a concreteness in Wisconsin that the decision did not have in many other states. But now that has mostly worked its way through the system. The Supreme Court has weighed in. Abortion services have been restored at least a couple of those clinics. So the court has, I think the focus of the court and these Supreme Court elections has moved on to other things. As we mentioned already, Act 10 and public sector union rights, redistricting and election laws. I think there are some issues related to K through 12 education that are bubbling up around the state that may come back to the court. There are always issues of environmental regulation and the rights of businesses and water quality and other kinds of things. So it's always a full docket for the Supreme Court, and I think more important issues are now ending up there than in the past because the lawmaking branches of government, the governor and the state legislature, often can't cooperate to produce laws and get things done. And so parties end up litigating instead and bringing things to the court.
The court never took up the question of whether there's a constitutional right to an inherent right to an abortion via, equal protection and a right to privacy that would inherently provide a right to an abortion. That question was never taken up by the court. Do you anticipate that maybe that or other additional litigation on the issue of abortion could be taken up by the court in the future?
There could be other cases dealing with abortion or reproductive rights in various ways. And that's another reason for voters to pay attention to this race. Although conservatives are not going to take control of the court this year, it's just not mathematically possible. It is possible for the liberals to grow their majority from the current 4-3 mix to a 5-2 mix if Taylor were to beat Lazar. That might encourage litigants, groups that want to bring suits where they think where they favor a progressive answer to the question. It might encourage them to bring more cases to the court if they feel as though they've got a 5-seat majority there and even losing a justice would still let them prevail on some important cases. We might see more litigation pushing in a progressive direction with a larger progressive majority. So I think the kinds of things that precisely come up as complaints before the court depend in part on whether the liberals make a gain this year or we end up holding with the current 4-3 mix.
And are you able to elaborate a little bit on the K through 12? I know there's the 400-year veto that Evers did, which would increase school funding limits for the next 400 years. What else are you watching for when it comes to K through 12 education?
It seems as though there are both funding issues and some policy issues in the schools that could find their way back to the Supreme Court. There is the veto power of the governor and the funding formula for schools. There was just a case filed in Eau Claire trying to force the state legislature to provide more generous and more equitable funding to school districts around the state. That could end up being a Supreme Court case. There are a variety of lower level disputes and cases around the state dealing with gender and trans rights in schools and what kinds of policies the schools can have in terms of students' use of pronouns and other kinds of treatments of issues in schools or in curricula. Those could end up being cases that come back to the Supreme Court. So I think there's a whole range of things related to K through 12 education that are not likely to go away. So many things that really matter to people, day-to-day lives, will end up before these justices.
Barry Burton, politics professor with UW-Madison, thank you so much for speaking to me about this.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Barry Burton is a politics professor and director of the Elections Research Center at UW-Madison. He spoke with WUWM's Maayan Silver. Election Day is tomorrow. Same-day registration is available at all polling locations. You can find yours at myvote.wi.gov. You can also find information about the candidates in WUWM's voter guide. You're able to use resources like our voter guide in the ballot box. In about 15 minutes, we'll share some ways to prepare for spring and summer storms. But first, we'll tell you what a county supervisor does and how the job they do can impact your life. That's coming up on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. All 18 seats on the Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors are up for election tomorrow. Each supervisor represents a different region of Milwaukee County on the board. And as a group, they make decisions that affect our parks, public transit, mental health services, and much more. To break down what the Milwaukee County Board does, Lake Effect's Excrit Nunez is joined by Phil Rocco, a political science professor at Marquette University.
What is the Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors, and what do they do?
So the Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors is an 18-member legislative body of the county, and it does essentially what a legislature in any sort of system of government would do. If there are executive nominations to particular positions, it reviews and votes on those. It modifies the budget that the county executive proposes in line with its own priorities. It can propose ordinances and changes to ordinances to create new programs. And it can also consider ordinance changes that the county executive proposes and votes on those. So, you can think of it as an analog to the state legislature or the Milwaukee Common Council, really a legislative body.
So you listed some of their responsibilities as a legislative body. How does the work of the county board affect Milwaukee County residents' day-to-day lives?
The way that I like to think about it is much of the most important action that the county board does is reviewing and voting on and amending the budget that's proposed by the county executive. And that's a process that starts in the spring and it goes through to the fall. It's quite a long budget process. But that affects so many of the services that shape our kind of daily lives. Many services that affect people living all throughout Milwaukee County, which is the largest, most populous county in the state. All of those budget functions that the county executive proposes, but the county board of supervisors can amend, are really, really significant. And if you think about what the county can do, it's enacted some programs that have been hugely impactful, something like Housing First, a program that has really made Milwaukee a leader in reducing homelessness around the country. That's a county program. And so while people, I think, forget about kind of what is Milwaukee County and how does it differ from the city of Milwaukee, it's important to look at those details of the programs that the county has. And County Board of Supervisors makes some really important decisions about how those programs are funded and how we balance all of the different responsibilities that the county has to attend to.
So you explained how one of the biggest things that the County Board of Supervisors is in charge of is approving the county's budget every year. What are the services that the county particularly funds?
So the county offers a vast array of services, and it's helpful to think about the county is really kind of a dual-purpose government. On the one hand, the county is an administrative arm of the state government, and so a lot of its functions are spoken for by mandatory requirements from the state, which the county has to fund. But then it also provides services that it has the discretion to do that aren't required by the state. But to put that in context, about 75% of our expenditures are accounted for by things that the state requires us to do. So that's things like the court system, the sheriff's office, the jail, things of that nature. But the county also funds some really important services. Transportation is a big one, MCTS. The park system, which is sort of one of the quality of life jewels of living in this region. The county also funds a vast array of behavioral health and mental health services for people with disabilities, older residents. It funds housing programs, really a pretty broad array of programs that shape kind of what it's like to live in this area.
And are there any big changes to the county budget that people should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple big things that were happening that shape the county's budgets in recent years. Like, one of the big things is that while the county relies extensively on state aid, because again, the county is kind of a part of the apparatus of state government, state aids, with the exception of an increase through Act 12 a few years ago, I mean, state aids for things like transportation and a variety of other services have been pretty flat, even though the costs of providing services due to inflation and a variety of other factors have gone up. So that has put the county in a kind of squeeze. So property taxes are going to go up about 4.1%, and there are probably going to be more property tax increases in future years, but that is capped by the state's levy limit. Additionally, if you ride the bus, if you take MCTS, there's going to be a fare increase. You've probably already seen that. And there's been reduced service on some lines. And while most county services are going to be maintained, for now, it's possible that we're going to see budget pressures that force tougher decisions in the years ahead. And it's not just because of flat state aid and rising costs. It's also the fact that the county really has kind of limited revenue mix. Most of what the county is able to draw on is property tax. It was only recently allowed to levy an additional sales tax, which really was a game changer. But it doesn't have the same kind of diverse revenue mix that counties in other parts of the country do. And so that really, especially when you have rising costs and limited aid coming from the state, it puts county government in a pretty difficult bind.
So what are some of the budget cuts that the county board has recently made?
The 2026 budget was a really difficult budget year. It was the first time in about half a decade that the county had to close a big budget gap, I think about $46.7 million. And there were reductions in service kind of spread across county government, and that ranges from things like behavioral health services to some frequency reductions in the transit services and the buses. So those cuts are kind of spread across units of government. But the other thing to keep in mind is that some really important decisions and maybe more difficult cuts are kind of on the forefront.
I'm Lake Effect's Grant Nunez speaking with Phil Rocco, a political science professor at Marquette University, to help explain the role of the Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors. Well, I want to move on and talk about what district seats are currently up for election. Can you talk about that? So right now, all 18 seats are up for re-election on the County Board of Supervisors, but there are only 3 contested elections where you're going to see more than one candidate on the ballot, and that is District 9, which is the far southwest corner of the county. It includes Franklin. District 11, which is also pretty far in the southwest, includes Greendale, and District 7, which is further northwest in Milwaukee County. So you only really have 3 contested races, even though all 18 members are up for re-election. And why are there so many uncontested races? Yeah, this is a phenomenon in local government generally in the United States. Local governments have the highest percentage of uncontested races nationally. It's certainly true of county board seats in Wisconsin generally. And there's a variety of different explanations for this. One is that local governments are a lower salience form of government. It's not the level of government that people think about. Often when it's working well, people don't think about it, and that creates fewer kind of opportunities for kind of electoral turnover or contestation. Another reason why is participation in local elections is often very low. Turnout rates are typically a fraction of what they are in presidential elections or congressional elections. And that is driven in part by the fact that county board races in places like Milwaukee happen in the spring. They're off cycle with national elections, and they're off cycle here even with other executive office elections for county. So that can drive down turnout. And there's a kind of chicken and egg relationship between turnout and contestation of races. If you don't have a very well contested race, that's going to drive down turnout. And if you have lower turnout, that creates, I think, a more difficult road to contesting a seat. And what are some of the issues supervisors will have to face if elected or reelected this year?
So the county's fiscal problems are by no means solved. Right? Many of the dynamics that are kind of driving county budget challenges that we're faced in the current budget are going to continue. Flat state aid, rising service costs, deferred maintenance on county buildings, those will continue. And so it's going to continue to be a balancing act. So there's going to be a lot to pay attention to as a resident of Milwaukee County in the year to come. And I think that there are also broader national kind of political issues that the county is going to be forced to respond to. The Trump administration's cuts to major programs, including Medicaid. I mean, that's a huge issue for residents in the county. Food stamps, SNAP, another really important issue. And the county has kind of limited capacity, fiscal capacity anyway, to respond to some of those major federal cuts. But it's going to feel the consequences because of the role that the county plays in service provision. It's going to feel the blowback of those federal decisions. The county is also one of these places where the role of multiple levels of government, federal, state, and local, kind of come together. It's a meeting point for those roles. And so what happens nationally, we're not necessarily immune from here in Milwaukee County.
Well, reflecting on everything that we've talked about, why should people care about who their county supervisor is, even if they don't live in a district with a competitive election?
Counties are often what political scientists call forgotten governments. They're units of government that people kind of take for granted until things really stop working or until there are major cuts that affect them. But the thing that I would emphasize is that the county shapes so many services that affect the quality of life that we have here. And even if there isn't a contested race on your ballot, the election is only one venue in which representation in politics plays out. You can write to or try to schedule a meeting with your county supervisor if there's an issue on the county's agenda that matters to you. The other thing is that most people don't know this, that county meetings are broadcast virtually, so you can watch them online and follow what's going on. But the important thing to know is that it's not just every 2 years or 4 years that your voice matters. It's when issues come up before the county that affect you, you have a right and a responsibility in a way to speak up and to play your role in our local political process.
Well, Phil, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I really appreciate you helping me understand the role of the Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors.
Great to be with you.
Phil Rocco is an associate professor and chair of the political science department at Marquette University. He spoke with Lake Effect's Excret Nunez. You can find information about all of the Milwaukee County supervisor candidates in competitive races at wuwm.com. Do you need some flexibility for when you listen? You can listen to Lake Effect on demand. Find it as a podcast wherever you like to download and enjoy on the go. Coming up, we'll share some important tips on staying safe during the stormy spring season. That's next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. April showers and storms have arrived in Wisconsin. Spring and summer weather also bring the threat of emergencies, like tornadoes and flooding. Lake Effect's Sam Woods is joined by Wisconsin Emergency Management's Public Information Officer Katie Rusnellos to talk about preparing for emergencies this spring.
So we're heading into the spring and summer months. Winter is over. But Katie, does that mean that we're out of the woods for emergency weather prep?
No, it doesn't. There's a whole host of other weather things that can happen during the warmer months when you get into spring and summer. You get thunderstorms that can produce high winds, that can produce heavy rains that can cause flooding. There's lightning. And then there's also tornadoes. And the thing is, tornadoes can happen any time of year. And we saw that in 2024 in February, where that was the first February tornado in the state. But there has been a tornado recorded in Wisconsin in every single month of the year. So some of these things aren't just based on spring or summer. Sometimes they can happen in fall and winter as well.
So when thinking about extreme spring and summer weather here in Wisconsin, what are some things that you'd like us to keep in mind?
Some things to keep in mind with severe weather season is when there is flooding, whether that's river flooding or flash flooding, please do not drive your vehicle into flooded water. You don't know how deep it is. You don't know what's in it. The same goes for walking in the water. We've all seen those videos of people sloshing in the water, walking up and down the streets, or kids playing in it. The problem with that is you don't know what's in the water. There could be liquids that are contaminating the water. There could be dangerous items that you don't see because they're covered in water that you walk on. And with floodwaters, it only takes 6 inches to knock someone over, and that could potentially be a deadly situation that you would find yourself in. Other things to pay attention to would be tornadoes. If a tornado occurs, you'll hear an outdoor siren sometimes if your community has them. That's not 100% foolproof, because think about in those summer months when you have all your windows closed and the air conditioner is running, you're not going to hear that outdoor siren. So it's important to have multiple ways to receive emergency alerts. That could include having those wireless emergency alerts on your phone turned on for emergency weather information. What happens with those is the National Weather Service will send then a little alert to your area where you are located at, and it will tell you, hey, there's a tornado warning. Take shelter now. Other things would be having an NOAA weather radio, and those are good things to have because not only can you plug them in to an electrical outlet, they also can have batteries in there. So if there's a power outage, you can still get those alerts, even though the power's not on, because it is a battery operated radio. And other ways to get those alerts are getting a weather app on your phone that can give those weather alerts to you, getting a phone call from family and friends saying, hey, I just saw that there's a tornado near your area, or even getting that information from your local TV or radio station.
Living in the Midwest has taught me one thing, is that the weather is constantly changing. And while we may be having tornadoes today, that it may very well be 95 degrees tomorrow. So thinking of summer heat emergencies, how do I know when I'm just feeling warm versus I am feeling so warm that I should seek medical attention?
So when you're feeling warm, that's one thing, as you were saying, but some things to look out for would be heat stroke, heat exhaustion, those issues. You might be having some heavy sweating, and you get cold, pale, clammy skin, fast, weak pulse. That's for heat exhaustion. For heat stroke, your body temperature is actually going to be rising up. So think like a fever. So if your temperature is 103 degrees or higher, that's very dangerous temperature to have. And if you have heat stroke, call 911 right away. It's very important to do that. And then if you are with someone who you think has heat stroke, you want to move that person to a cooler place and help lower the person's temperature with cool cloths or a cool bath. Just don't give them anything to drink.
What are some common misconceptions that you hear regarding spring and summer emergency preparedness?
One of the things that I do hear occasionally from people who might be moving up to Wisconsin from a warmer climate is I'm safe because I'm used to the heat. That's not true. No matter how familiar you are with the hot weather, the risk of heat illness still is high. So you still got to look out for those heat exhaustion, heat stroke type symptoms. And the key thing is when those hotter days come around is to make sure that you drink plenty of water. And with that, there's the caveat that while drinking water and staying hydrated is crucial, just drinking it alone is not always going to be helpful. You want to have something that has those electrolytes in there that helps maintain your body functions and prevent those heat-related illnesses.
Well, Katie, thank you so much for joining me on Lake Effect. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Sam.
Katie Rusnellos is Wisconsin Emergency Management's Public Information Officer. She spoke with Lake Effect's Sam Woods last year. And that wraps up today's show. Thank you so much for being here with us. I'm Joy Powers. If you missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, we'll look at the latest Women's Wellbeing Index report, which measures how women across Wisconsin are faring in areas like economic security, health, and safety. Thanks so much for joining us right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.